I wonder what good news would be for you right now. What would that look like? What would have to happen? I'm wondering, ancient teacher and healer, a young man in his 30s, wandering from village to village about 2,000 odd years ago, talked a lot about good news. As he travelled around, small village to small village, people gathered around him to hear and to see the kind of things he did, what he said. Not everyone in these crowds was a fan. Some were really excited by the kind of things he was saying and especially what he was doing for people. Other people are more threatened. He challenges what they're thinking, what they believe, their position, sometimes their business. But he keeps talking about good news. He talks about good news and he talks about a kingdom. In the ancient Near East, especially in what we now know as Palestine or the country Israel, the hope that would be going around at the time of Jesus of Nazareth was good news that would be good news for them, good news for the Jews. It would probably mean a new Jewish king, a new Jewish priest, a new, ideally, Jewish empire. That's not what Jesus of Nazareth seems to be doing or saying. Instead, he's talking about good news that's good news for the poor, the sick, the trapped, the oppressed. And when he talks about kingdom, it doesn't seem that he's actually talking about a place and a land with a king in charge. He's talking about a way of thinking about the world. So this is not a new Jewish king raising a new Jewish army and starting a new Jewish empire. Instead, it's a catchphrase for the world the way God intended it to be. And that looks a bit unexpected for all those who would rather it was about getting rid of non-Jewish things or getting rid of the Romans or maybe getting revenge. Instead, the idea of the kingdom seems to be about sorting things out. And as Jesus describes what he's talking about, he talks about love. And not just love for other Jewish people, but love for everyone and everything. Love for your enemies. About doing what you were made for. Doing good. Blessing. Being a blessing. Blessing those around you. Praying for all sorts of people and including all sorts of people. The outcasts. Even your enemies. It's no wonder he got a mixed reaction. And so it's no surprise that he tells a story that seems to be about that reaction. In one of the collections of the stories we have about Jesus of Nazareth, in a book called Luke, in chapter 8, we hear a story Jesus tells about a farmer who goes to sow seeds. Now, when Jesus is operating, very much this would have been the daily experience of most of his listeners, seeing seeds being planted, crops being grown. I'm from a family with generations of farmers. Let me tell you, hearing about this particular farmer doesn't immediately strike me with admiration, because what kind of farmer scatters these precious, expensive seeds everywhere? On the path, on the rocks, in the bushes. The kind of machines that we use today to sow seeds in fields are computer controlled to make sure that the seeds only go exactly in the right spot with the right extra things to help them and in the right levels to make sure they have the best yield, the best production, the best fruit, and that nothing is wasted like this. But of course, this isn't a story about efficient, effective farming. In this case, the scattered seeds have lots of different responses, if you like, just in the same way that Jesus' words and actions have. Some of these seeds fall on a hard path, some get ruined or taken away by birds, some fall on rocks, some don't have enough roots to get enough water, others fall into thorns, and other plants grow up and choke their growth. But the story doesn't end with bad news. Instead, the point, or a point of the story, is that there is good soil. And where there is good soil, it produces a great crop. Jesus told a few stories like this. We call them parables. They invite us to think in new ways. They invite us into the story to try and find ourselves in it. It might sound, as Jesus describes how he uses these parables, that there are some sort of secrets that he's trying to keep for certain people. But in fact, the reality in this big collection of stories and in the way God and his people seems to operate is the opposite. And where our translation here uses the word secrets, the Greek word in there is actually the word mysterion. It's where we get the word mystery. If God were trying to keep secrets, he wouldn't reveal himself in his creation, in his spirit and his presence in the world, in all the different stories of how he's dealt with people over the years, including the story of the Jewish people, in the prophets and the poets and the artists who make up this collection of books we call the Bible. Jesus' little reference here to Isaiah, one of their great prophets, who was inspired to tell people the reality of what was going on, reminds his listeners that God's message, the message that Jesus is now living out, is always going to get a mixed reaction. That's the reality of a creation, the story says, that is broken and that works so often against what God is trying to do. Not because God has made the truth hard to find, but because all sorts of other stuff gets in the way and threatens what God is doing and saying. But in the long run, this story says there is good soil and there will be a great crop. After being pressed a little bit, Jesus explains at least one version of what this parable might be saying. He describes the pushback of someone he calls the devil, or the Satan. The word means an accuser. That symbol of all the opposition to what God is doing. He talks also about resistance that wears people down, whether it's the grinding down of the Roman Empire in their case, or just the hard work and patience of working against things falling apart and putting things back together. And he also talks about distractions, temptations, the mixed messages, seductive messages, attacking messages, grinding messages of the empire way of thinking that chokes good news with worries and riches and offers of pleasures. You don't need me or Jesus to actually explain each one of those in detail. Jesus' followers, the crowds, they didn't need him to explain. They knew the reality that he was talking about it. But the story prods, provokes, draws them and us into wrestling again with some of the questions about where am I in the story? What is the reality of the creation I operate in? What needs to be done to put it back together? What's the reality of the opposition? The reality that if I'm too challenged or too caught up in an empire way of thinking, then there are all sorts of distractions and it will be hard. And the hard thing is not working out what Jesus is saying or what the truth is in here. The hard part is actually responding, living it out, doing it patiently, expecting there to be this great crop. Jesus' story here has been called the parable of the sower, the parable of the seeds. But for me, it's not really about the sower or the seeds, except to say, look, don't worry, there will be a good crop. For me, what gets me going is the idea of the soil. You see, the evidence in the story for the good soil is that it nurtures seeds that can grow and then produce the fruit, the crop they were designed to produce. So in this story, the point is not about getting rewards. It's about what my part, our part is in the growth of these seeds, in being a community of people that is part of helping produce the fruit, the crop that we were made for. I said that parables invite the listener into the story to find their place. And I used to think maybe I was the sower, telling everybody about God, sowing the seeds. But now I see that the sower in this story is God himself. And he's gloriously wasteful. A farmer that throws seeds everywhere, over generous, not missing out anyone or anything, even places and people I don't think deserve it. This good news is good news for the poor. Unexpected news about a kingdom built on love, on doing good, on being a blessing, on praying for and with all kinds of people, even enemies. I believe my part, our job, is to keep on being in this place, in this time, the only place we can be of any use and the only time we can be any use, being good soil. Let's keep this place, this community, being somewhere where there's no trampling or stealing away or shallow roots or lack of water or too many distractions or a lack of patience and perseverance and careful long-term looking after and nurture. Let's keep being the good soil and let God do what he does.